So here's the Battletech question of the day. The LRM-5 pack, is it useless? What role does it play in the Battletech narrative, in the Battletech universe? And I ask this question because as we explore various weapon systems, naturally, yes, range is very, very important. If I can hit you before you hit me, that's generally a good thing. But we also need to balance that out with damage. And on the extreme end, something like the Autocannon 20, extreme, close range. I've got to get up there. I need some sort of plan. I need some sort of tactica. But if I make it up there and I can connect, I can keep those modifiers down, you're in a lot of trouble. And then, of course, we have weapon systems like large lasers and PPCs, which are a mix of range and damage. So from that perspective, what's also important is the tonnage and the type of weapons that are mounted on mechs. This idea with heavy and assault mechs and the higher end mediums, if I'm packing a PPC and say an Autocannon 5, that's not a lot of firepower for the tonnage that I have. And I'm going to be expected to use that tonnage very, very tactically and aggressively on the table. You'd look at a heavy mech with those two weapons and say, well, there has to be some other qualifier. Like maybe it's a custom mech that has extreme jump jets, or the fusion engine is so fast, it can move very, very fast. There's got to be some sort of novelty to it. But likewise, if we look at light mechs that don't have a lot of tonnage, a great example would be the Panther. A PPC on a light mech is a big deal. An LRM-10, the Valk is one of my favorite mechs. That's a big deal. Even though it's only one weapon system and it may not deliver the most damage, to have something on such a small package with speed creates a lot of opportunity. So when I look at the LRM-5, I look and say damage is very low. It's the lowest in the game, not counting anti-infantry like machine guns and flamers. Put those completely aside. It's low damage. It does have range, but it's dependent on ammo, and it takes up a lot of tonnage. So from that perspective, when you see an LRM-5 mounted on a mech, and we're going to look at a couple of designs, what's the idea behind it? And can something else do it better, namely an Autocannon 5? Now, the first counter I do saying the Autocannon 5, simply because that is range and guaranteed. Every single time you shoot, it's going to do the same thing. There's no other modifiers moving into that. Missiles are a little bit different. They're a little bit more dependent. So looking at it from that perspective, you'd say, well, if I have to pack ammo in there, then give me that Autocannon 5, or maybe even Autocannon 10. But then we're getting into higher echelon and ranges of damage. So the LRM-5, the two things that come to mind for me in asking how to use this, sometimes you have just through design quirks. Sometimes you have a mech, especially on the higher ends with the heavies and the assaults. You pack on all the armor. You pack on all the internals. You juice out the primary weapon systems. So you've got something primary like a PPC. Then you've got secondary weapons, multiple medium lasers, some short-range punch, maybe some machine guns, some SRM packs, hopefully the 6-packs on there, but maybe 4s. You've got your brace of weapons, or you've got your large laser, you've got a bunch of medium lasers. And then you've got this little, extra tonnage hanging out, where maybe you're like, all right, look, just slap a small laser on the head and call it a day. But also, sometimes the tonnage works out where you can pack in an LRM-5. Now, at the end of the day, a shot is a shot. We'll take any shot that we can possibly shoot. So you see something like the Grasshopper has that LRM-5 pack in the head. That kind of gives it its interesting design or view as a mech warrior, as a mech pilot. And from that perspective, of course, look, the primary focus of the Grasshopper are the lasers. But that 5-pack is something else, gives it something else to do on the way in. So on the way in, as soon as it's in range, it's laying down the 5-pack. Heat is minimal, and you don't really have to worry. Maybe you connect, maybe you don't. But at the very least, you're putting some missiles down on the table. But that battle value buy-in is for something completely different. That LRM-5 is a little bit secondary. So that's kind of the first example that comes to mind for me. But then we start to explore the light mechs, the Thorn. Now, the Thorn is a mech that I regularly play. It's kind of like a pod-based mech. And it has, for a light mech, It's got good speed. Armor is, well, it's a light mech. But it also has an interesting combination of medium lasers and an LRM-5 pack. And that LRM-5 pack in that type of configuration allows me to have that range, have that spread, indirect. Now, the indirect is important. We're moving into indirect. Fritz, you always move to indirect. Yes, indirect is a massive consideration in the Battletech universe. And indirect fire, for those of you new to the tabletop Battletech game, long-range missiles fire straight on at a target. But there's also a rule called indirect fire where if you have a spotter, and I'm simplifying the rules a little bit here. If you have a spotter, a unit, or infantry or something, scout vehicle, swift-wind scout vehicle, you can radio in or comm in or whatever it's going to be to that position, and you can fire your LRMs at a target that is not in primary view from the attacker. So I can hide my longbows behind buildings and lob missiles or fire off missiles. Now, there's modifiers, there's cover. It's not easy to do, even if you're kind of out in the open. There's some other considerations you have to take into effect because essentially you're firing on a target point, not necessarily a target. And of course, that target is moving and you're moving, so there's a lot of dynamic action. But that opens up a ton. Now, if I've got my two longbows, 20-pack, 5 and 5. If I've got my archers, 20s and 20s. If I've got my my LRM carriers, we were talking about SRMs yesterday, LRM carriers, 20, 20, 20 in each one, real time, that's hundreds of missiles. That's got some spice. That's got some bite. On the opposite end, though, taking something like the Thorn, and the reason why I play this mech, this is a skirmish mech. So I find the LRM-5, if I look at it purely from damage, which, yes, absolutely is an important criteria. That's like criteria number one, damage and range. But it also has a use, and I have to also consider the tactica value of what it may reveal. So I utilize an LRM-5 in the Thorn. It gives me the range. It gives me the ability to possibly indirect that an autocannon doesn't have. And I don't play House Davian, but I love autocannons also. But with that perspective, you can lob over that 5-pack, the Thorn, use it as a skirmish. Usually I send it down the flanks, or in City Tech, I send it running down some alleys, and it'll start shooting indirect. Is it really going to connect? Is it going to really do some damage? Thinking back to the past couple of games where I've played it recently, I've hit a few times, put a little bit of a hurt on a light mech, but certainly didn't cripple it. The kill ratio is not there for the Thorn, but for the battle value buy-in, that's not the point. The point is, once I start indirect fire with that LRM-5, then that gets your attention. I get an insight to your battle plan. Are you really committed to that primary flashpoint? Or are you going to send off a tank or two or a hover unit or two to kind of get rid of that Thorn, push it away? I mean, it's not enough to force you to commit. Difference is if I take a Jenner and I work on your flank, you can't have that speed, all those medium lasers, and that SRM pack. You can't. You are going to divert something to deal with that Jenner. Maybe even turn around a part of your lance, or you're going to have to do it. Maybe that's good. Maybe I want that. I mean, that is valuable to kind of split a lance. But maybe I just want to see. Maybe I just want to see what you're going to do. And with the Thorn, an LRM-5 pack is like a probe. Just fire off some missiles, see what happens. Does your opponent ignore it? That means they're kind of aware and they're focused and they're going towards that mission objective with all the battle value. I mean, just as an example, I wouldn't necessarily do this, but we're keeping it simple. If you have a lance going against me, whatever that lance is, add up all the battle value and figure out the point on the hex map where you are heading to, where my mechs are. You have committed that much battle value. I have to deal with that battle value, whatever those numbers are, again, whatever the mechs are. If I have my Thorn firing off some missiles and you're like, you know what, I'm going to take my Stinger and just try to chase down that Thorn, you've now diverted part of that battle value away from the hex map point that you are heading towards. I don't even need to do the damage, right? The two ways that you can removing battle value. I've got to make a note here. This is important tactica for the next vlog. You need to remove battle value. The way you remove battle value, ideally, is you blow it up, because then not only do you remove the battle value, you also remove an initiative movement for your opponent. You take that piece away. If you can't blow it up, then if you can tie it up, if you can keep it busy somewhere else so that battle value is not shooting at you, that has some very, very interesting tactica implications. So utilizing the Thorn with that LRM-5 pack directly or indirectly, that's the use that I see. We also see LRM-5 packs, again, on heavier machines that just you have a little bit of extra tonnage and toss it in there. And certainly I'm not going to turn down any weapon, but my vote, it's kind of useless, but useless from a pure damage perspective. But from the tactica of what it can possibly open up, that indirect is what buys you, and that indirect is what is worth the price of admission.